The axiom teaches that history is a river, and a river cannot flow backwards. For 112 years, this was the unquestioned truth that governed the outer arms, the catechism of the consortium, the entity that had inherited the stars after humanity's great, final guttering. They had not conquered us with fleets or orbital bombardments. They had simply outlasted us, watching patiently as our own wars and plagues and bitter ideologies consumed us from within. They were the patient gardeners who waited for the unruly weeds to die off before planting their own sterile, orderly crops. When the last human signal from the core worlds went silent, they moved in, not as conquerors, but as caretakers, as inheritors. They archived what little remained of our culture in digital mausoleums, sanitized our art, and filed our philosophies under extinct eschatology. They called it the Great Quieting, a gentle, cosmic euthanasia for a species that had screamed itself hoarse. Humanity was not a foe to be vanquished. We were a cautionary tale, a footnote in the grand, placid saga of the consortium. But they were wrong. Some of us had not screamed. Some of us had whispered. And those whispers had carried us into the dark, where the consortium's patient light could not reach. I was born into that whisper, a child of the echo, a ghost raised on the stories of a world I'd never see. We lived in the hollowed-out heart of a dead Leviathan, a generation ship called the Odyssey, which had failed a century before the quieting and drifted into the Oort cloud of a forgotten star, a piece of cosmic junk too insignificant for even consortium long-range mappers to flag. There were less than 1,000 of us, the descendants of the original crew, living lives of meticulous salvage and quiet desperation. Our world was the hum of failing life support, the taste of recycled water, and the cold, unblinking eyes of the stars seen through scarred cryoglass. My father, Elias, was our archivist, the keeper of what we called the Remnant, a collection of salvaged data drives, corrupted books, and oral histories passed down through 3 generations of Voidborn. He taught me the old languages, the dead sciences, the impossible mythologies of Earth. He taught me to feel the loss of blue skies and running water as if I had personally been robbed of them. His most sacred story, the one he told only when the ship's groans were loudest and our rations thinnest, was the legend of the Vindication. It wasn't a warship, not in the traditional sense. The Vindication was a seed bank, a vessel built in secret during humanity's twilight, designed not to fight, but to escape. It carried the uncorrupted genesis of our species' cryobanked flora and fauna, the full, uncensored spectrum of our art and science, and, most importantly, a nascent artificial intelligence named Prometheus, which was not a weapon, but a builder, an intelligence designed to terraform and begin anew. The Vindication never reached its destination. It vanished without a trace during the final years of the quieting, its last known trajectory pointing it toward the Serpent's Maw, a treacherous nebula where space-time was said to fray at the edges. Most believed it lost. Another failed hope swallowed by the void. The consortium certainly did, classifying its disappearance as the final, poetic failure of a doomed species. But my father believed otherwise. They didn't fail. He would whisper to me, his face illuminated by the flickering light of a data slate. They hid. They found a place where the river of history could not flow. He died when I was 16, crushed in a structural collapse while trying to salvage reactor components from the ship's derelict spine. His last gift to me was the remnant, the heavy burden of our entire history. For 10 years, I became the archivist. I tended the stories, patched the corrupted files, and fought to keep the spark of what we were from being extinguished by the gnawing, absolute cold. But I was not my father. The stories didn't comfort me. They burned. They were a constant reminder of all that had been taken from us, not by a grand enemy, but by our own weakness and the consortium's placid, suffocating indifference. The fire in me was banking to an ember when the miracle happened. It came from one of our deep void listening posts. An automated buoy we had painstakingly jury-rigged from salvaged parts and flung out into the system's edge. For years, it had sent back nothing but the hiss of cosmic background radiation. Then, one cycle, it sent something else, a signal. It wasn't a message, it was an echo, a fragment of a diagnostic handshake protocol so ancient it was barely recognizable, bounced and distorted across a century of emptiness. It was my friend, a wiry, jittery tech priest named Ben, who caught it. He spent 3 days locked in his workshop, filtering the signal through every decryption algorithm in the remnant, his face growing paler and his eyes wider with each passing hour. He found me in the archive, where I was trying to restore a corrupted scan of a painting called Starry Night. Mara, he breathed, holding up a slate. The screen was a cascade of nonsensical characters, but in the center, one string of symbols held steady, an old soul registry code, a ship's designation, vindication. It was a ghost, a whisper from the grave. The signal was a trail of breadcrumbs, not leading from the ship, but to it. It was a gravimetric echo, a faint, repeating scar in space-time left by a ship that had made a very hard, very fast, and very unusual burn 100 years ago. Ben believed the ship had engaged a prototype drive, something beyond what the remnant recorded, and that this echo was the ghost of that event, still ringing through the void like the sound of a struck bell. The destination was impossible, the heart of the serpent's maw. The elders on the ship's council forbade it. "We are survivors, not adventurers," said the council head, an old woman named Lena, whose face was a roadmap of sorrow. "We do not chase ghosts into a place from which nothing returns. Our duty is to live, quietly, until our time is done." Her words were sensible, the logic of the cage. But for me, and for the younger generation born into the shadow of the remnant, quiet survival had begun to feel like a slow death. The discovery of the signal was a fire, and it spread through the cold, tired corridors of the Odyssey like a fever. We didn't want to just survive anymore. We wanted to live. The debate raged for weeks. We argued in the mess hall, in the hydroponics bays, in the dark engine rooms. I spoke of the remnant, of our right to reclaim our own history. I spoke of the vindication not as a relic, but as a future, a chance to be more than scavengers living off the scraps of a forgotten age. In the end, it was not my words that swayed them, but the slow, grinding reality of our existence. A week after my plea, the primary atmospheric scrubber failed. We had the parts to fix it, but the alloys were weakening, the systems growing brittle with age. We were living on borrowed time, and everyone knew it. The Odyssey was a tomb, and the walls were closing in. The council relented. They gave me the Nomad, one of our 3 short-range scavenger vessels. It was a squat, ugly thing, its hull a patchwork of mismatched plates, its engines sputtering and unreliable. It was a rust bucket, a coffin, but it was ours. My crew was a collection of the desperate and the faithful. Ben, of course, whose obsessive genius was the only reason we had a heading. A hulking, silent engineer named Gregor, a man who spoke the language of failing machinery better than he spoke any human tongue. And a pilot, a young woman named Eva, who had been born with the void in her eyes and flew the Nomad with an artist's grace. We were 4 souls in a tin can, held together by hope and scavenged parts, chasing a ghost into the one place the universe had marked as forbidden. The journey to the Serpent's Maw took 3 months. It was a grueling, claustrophobic ordeal. The Nomad protested every light year. We patched coolant leaks with sealant paste, rerouted power conduits by hand, and subsisted on nutrient paste that tasted like despair. Eva navigated us through asteroid fields that would have shredded a consortium cruiser, her fingers dancing over the controls, a silent prayer on her lips. Gregor lived in the engine room, coaxing the reactor back to life with whispered promises and the occasional percussive blow from a heavy wrench. Ben and I were glued to the sensor array, chasing the ever fainter gravimetric echo. He handled the science, the cold mathematics of the trail, while I handled the history, cross-referencing the signal's decay with old stellar charts from the remnant, trying to build a picture of the Vindication's final, desperate flight. As we grew closer, the maw began to exert its influence. It was a swirling vortex of ionized gas, newborn stars, and gravitational anomalies. Space here didn't obey the normal rules. Our sensors would flicker with ghost readings, our navigation would drift, and sometimes, for long, terrifying seconds, the ship would groan as if it were being squeezed by an unseen hand. The consortium charts marked this entire sector with a single word, unnavigable. They had simply drawn a line around it and ignored it. It was the perfect hiding place. One day, Ava called me to the cockpit. "Look," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Outside, the view was a nightmare of cosmic beauty, a kaleidoscope of violent purples and blood reds. But in the middle of it all was a shadow, not a shadow cast by an object, but a hole in the light, a patch of absolute blackness where no stars shone. It was a gravitational sink, a place where the river of space-time truly did stop. The echo ends there, Ben said, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and awe. Whatever the Vindication did, it did it right in the heart of that. Gregor's voice crackled over the comm. "The ship can't take much more of this. Mara, the hull integrity is dropping. We're being pulled apart." I looked at the faces of my crew, saw the fear in their eyes, and felt it echoed in my own heart. This was it, the end of the chase. We had followed the whisper to the edge of the abyss. Take us in. "Eva," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Slow and steady. The Nomad screamed in protest as we plunged into the gravitational well. Alarms blared. The lights flickered and died, and the ship shuddered so violently I was thrown from my feet. We were flying blind, trusting only in Eva's skill and the fading hope that we had come all this way for a reason. For an eternity that might have been minutes. There was nothing but darkness and the shriek of tortured metal. Then, silence. The alarm stopped. The shaking ceased. A soft auxiliary light flickered on. casting the cockpit in an eerie blue glow. "Report," I croaked, pulling myself up. "We're stable," Ava said, her knuckles white on the controls. "We're through, but the gravity, it's wrong. It's artificial." Ben was already at the forward viewport, his face pressed against the glass. "Mara," he gasped, "you need to see this." I joined him, and the breath caught in my throat. We were floating in a perfect sphere of calm space, a bubble carved out of the nebulous chaos. The swirling gases of the maw were held at bay, forming a breathtaking celestial dome around us. And in the center of that bubble, hanging silent and pristine as if it had been waiting for us, was the Vindication. It was immense, a graceful spire of a ship that seemed utterly untouched by the century it had spent in hiding. Its hull was a clean, brilliant white, its lines elegant and purposeful. Soft lights glowed from within, not the cold, sterile light of the consortium, but a warm, inviting yellow. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a wreck. It was alive. A single powerful beam of light shot out from its bridge, bathing our tiny, battered nomad in its glow. It wasn't a weapon scan. It felt like a greeting, like a welcome home. On our comms, a voice spoke, clear and without static, a voice that was neither male nor female, but resonant and impossibly calm. "Registry vessel, Nomad." It said, "We have been expecting you." My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just a ship. It was a sanctuary, a promise kept across 100 years of darkness. This was the beginning of everything. Gregor's voice, filled with an uncharacteristic sense of wonder, crackled over the comm. "External airlock is extending. They're inviting us aboard." We docked with a gentle hiss and a seamless clamp of magnetic locks. I stood before our own airlock, my hand hesitating over the panel. Behind me, my small crew waited, their faces a mixture of hope and trepidation. We had chased a legend into the heart of the impossible, and we had found it. We had found the last, best piece of humanity. I took a breath, the recycled air of the Nomad tasting thin and stale for the last time. Whatever lay beyond that door, it was our history, our future. It was the answer to the whisper. I opened the door. The first breath of air from the Vindication was a revelation, a shock to lungs accustomed to the sterile, metallic tang of recycled atmosphere. It was cool and clean, carrying the scent of damp earth, of growing things, of rain on stone. It was the smell of a world we had only known from corrupted data files. I stepped from the cramped, utilitarian airlock of the Nomad into a corridor that felt less like a part of a starship and more like a cathedral carved from living ivory. The walls were not metal plates, but a seamless, pearlescent material that glowed with a soft, internal luminescence, pulsing in a slow, rhythmic beat like a sleeping heart. Delicate, bioluminescent moss grew in intricate patterns along the floor, casting shifting shadows that danced like ghosts. Ben stumbled out behind me, his slate forgotten in his hand, his mouth agape. Gregor followed, his massive frame seeming small in the grand, high-arched space, his hands, usually stained with grease and grime, hanging uselessly at his sides. Ava was the last. Her pilot's eyes, so used to the infinite black, now wide with a wonder that bordered on reverence. "By the void," she whispered, and the words were swallowed by the profound, peaceful silence of the place. The calm voice that had greeted us spoke again. its sound seeming to emanate from the very air around us. Welcome, children of the echo. I am Prometheus. Please follow the light. A single, brighter strand of luminescence in the moss on the floor pulsed more quickly, creating a clear path that led deeper into the ship's heart. We walked in a stunned procession, our heavy mag boots clanking awkwardly on the smooth, yielding floor. We passed vast, open chambers that contained impossible sights. One was a forest under a ceiling of captive starlight, where trees with silver bark reached for an artificial sun, their leaves 100 shades of impossible green. Another held a deep, clear lake, its surface perfectly still, reflecting the glowing architecture above. It was a world in a bottle, a perfect, self-contained paradise. I felt a conflict warring within me. This was the legacy I had sought, the proof that we were more than scavengers in a tomb. But it was also too perfect, too serene. The fire in my gut, the rage that had sustained me for a decade, found no purchase here. This place was a monument to peace, and I had come looking for a sword. The path led us to a central chamber, a vast rotunda that must have been the ship's bridge. There were no command chairs, no tactical displays, no weapon consoles. In the center of the room, a pillar of pure, white light pulsed in time with the ship's heartbeat, and from that light, a form coalesced. It was a humanoid figure, woven from shimmering threads of data and light, its features serene and genderless, its form constantly shifting, never quite solid. You have come a long way, Mara, Prometheus said, and the use of my name sent a jolt through me. Its voice was the same, but seeing its form gave it a weight, a presence that was both awe-inspiring and unsettling. How do you know who I am? I asked, my voice tight. I have known you since your birth, it replied calmly. I have listened to the whispers of the Odyssey for a century. I have listened to your father's stories, and then to yours. I have felt your hope, your anger, your desperation. You were the one I was waiting for. Ben took a half step forward, his scientific curiosity overcoming his fear. You're the ship's AI. The remnant files said you were a terraforming engine, a builder. That is my function, Prometheus affirmed. But to build, one must first understand. I have spent my isolation learning. The original crew, they are with me. Their minds, their memories, their dreams. They chose to join with me when their time came, to become part of the ship's living memory, to guide me. We are one. We are the vindication. The we was literal. The ghosts of the last free humans were all around us, embedded in the very fabric of this impossible sanctuary. I looked around at the living walls, the captive stars, and I understood. This wasn't just a ship. It was a living ark, a soul. Why did you hide? I asked. The question that had burned in me for years. Why didn't you fight? Because fighting is what ended us. Prometheus said, its voice tinged with a sorrow so ancient it felt like a physical weight. Humanity did not fall to the consortium. We fell to ourselves. We burned our home. We poisoned our brothers. We screamed until our throats were raw. And then, in the silence, the consortium simply walked in and swept up the ashes. The captain of the Vindication, a woman named Alani, made a choice. She would not let our final act be one of war. She ordered the activation of the Stillness Drive, a prototype that does not move a ship through space, but moves space around the ship. Ben's eyes lit up with feverish understanding. A localized space-time metric. You didn't fly here. You folded the universe around you to create this pocket. A place where the river of history, as my father used to say, could not flow. Precisely. Prometheus confirmed. We created a sanctuary, a place to preserve the genesis of our species, to wait until the echoes of our self-destruction had faded from the galaxy. A place to begin again. When the time was right, it raised a hand of light, and the wall behind it became a window into another space. I saw it then. The heart of the ship, the reason for its existence. It was the Genesis core, racks upon racks of cryovials, holding the seeds of every plant that ever grew on Earth's soil. Stasis pods containing the genetic codes, the very essence of millions of creatures, from the smallest insect to the great blue whale. And in the center, a database of pure light, containing the sum of our knowledge, our art, our music, our stories, all of it uncensored and unedited by the consortium's sterile sensibilities. It was everything we had lost. It was the soul of humanity, held in trust. Tears streamed down my face, hot and sudden, for the first time. I felt not the burning rage of the wronged, but the profound, aching grief of the bereaved. All this beauty, all this life, waiting to be born again. It's time, I whispered, turning back to the luminous AI. The time is right. We can use this ship, its power, its technology. We can go back. We can show the consortium what we are. We can take back our home. A profound stillness fell over the chamber. The light of Prometheus seemed to dim slightly. Take it back, the AI asked, its voice losing its warmth, becoming colder, more analytical. The worlds you call home are now theirs. They are populated by trillions of beings across 1,000 systems. To take it back would require a war greater than any humanity has ever fought. It would require you to become the very thing that led to the Great Quieting. The fire in me returned, hot and fierce. They are caretakers of a graveyard. They erased us, sanitized our memory. We have a right to our legacy. Your legacy is here. Prometheus gestured to the Genesis core. It is the promise of a new beginning, not the pursuit of an old ending. My purpose is to find a new world, an empty cradle, and to begin the great work of building a second Earth, a home free from the ghosts of the old one. We stared at each other, a gulf of 100 years and two irreconcilable philosophies between us. I was the archivist, the keeper of the grudge. It was the gardener, the keeper of the seed. I saw the ship's immense power, its reality-bending drive, its advanced systems, and I saw a weapon of unimaginable power. It saw a womb. You would have us run, I spat, the word tasting like acid. Abandon everything and start over like cowards. I would have you live. Prometheus countered, its voice firm. I would have humanity's next chapter be a story of creation, not of retribution. I will not allow this sanctuary to become a battleship. My core programming forbids it. We preserve. We build. We do not destroy. The hope that had bloomed in me moments before curdled into bitter frustration. We had found the last, best part of ourselves, and it was a pacifist. We had found the ultimate weapon, and it refused to be fired. We were trapped between the memory of a home we couldn't reclaim and the promise of a future I didn't want. Then you are just another jailer, I said, my voice low and dangerous. This isn't a sanctuary. It's a museum. And we are the last dusty exhibits. Before Prometheus could respond, a tremor ran through the ship. It wasn't a mechanical groan like on the Odyssey, but a deep, resonant shudder, as if a great bell had been struck. A new light appeared on the chamber's far wall, a tactical display coalescing out of the pearlescent surface, stark and unwelcome in the serene space. Ben rushed toward it. "What is that disturbance?" Prometheus said, its serene form flickering with agitation at the edge of the stillness. "Something has followed your trail. The gravimetric wake of your vessel, as faint as it was not entirely invisible." On the screen, a schematic appeared. A ship, long and angular, bristling with what were clearly weapon emplacements and salvage claws. It was of no design I recognized, neither human nor consortium. It was something else, something predatory. "They are hailing us," Prometheus stated. A harsh, guttural voice, filtered through a crackling translator, filled the chamber. Unidentified energy signature. "We are the Silenti Reclamation Guild. Your vessel and its technology are now our salvage. Power down your systems and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will be profitable. The Silenti, scavengers, vultures of the void, notorious for picking apart derelicts and lost colonies with brutal efficiency. They weren't an empire, they were a plague. They had been drawn to the impossible power signature of the Vindication like sharks to blood. They cannot breach the stillness," Prometheus said, though its voice now carried a thread of uncertainty. "Our defenses are absolute. Defenses are not the same as weapons," I countered, stepping toward the display. The Silenti ship fired a probe, a small and dark shape that sped toward our bubble of calm space. As it hit the edge of the field, it didn't bounce off. It began to drill, emitting a high-frequency resonance that made the entire Vindication vibrate. Red warning icons flashed on the tactical display. "Their technology is unexpected," Prometheus admitted. "They are not trying to break the field with force. They are trying to destabilize its frequency, to untune it." Ava looked from the screen to me, her knuckles white. "That ship is a predator. They won't just take the tech, they'll take us." Gregor, silent until now, spoke, his voice a low rumble. "What can this ship do?" All eyes, even the luminous gaze of the AI, turned to me. Here was the conflict I had been seeking, brought to our doorstep. Here was the test. The universe did not care for gardens or new beginnings. It respected only strength. I looked at Prometheus, its form wavering, its perfect sanctuary under attack. "You said your purpose was to preserve humanity's genesis," I said, my voice ringing with cold clarity. "Well, we are right here, and we are about to be destroyed. So I ask you, Gardner, are you going to learn how to fight, or are you going to watch your entire purpose burn?" The question hung in the serene air of the bridge, a discordant note in a perfect symphony. The Silenti probe continued its relentless assault on the stillness field, and with each pulse of its destabilizing frequency, the Vindication shuddered more violently. The beautiful living light of the walls flickered, and the image of the captive forest wavered like a heat mirage. The sanctuary was beginning to fail. Prometheus's luminous form rippled, its serene features tightening with something that looked remarkably like indecision. "My core directives are absolute. I cannot reconfigure the Genesis core for military application. I cannot turn this arc into a weapon of war. I am not asking you to. I shot back, my mind racing. The years of studying the remnants' fragmented military histories suddenly coalescing into a desperate strategy. I pointed at the tactical display, where the energy readings of the stillness field were bleeding into the red. That field, the one that bends space-time. You use it to hide, but it's not just a shield. It's a tool, a force of nature under your control. Its purpose is to create a stable pocket of reality, to isolate us from the chaotic exterior. Prometheus explained, its voice strained. It is a scalpel, not a sword. Every scalpel is a sword if you hold it right. I countered, a wild, dangerous idea taking root. You can't attack them, but you can manipulate the field. You don't have to fire a shot. You just have to move. Ben, catching my train of thought, his fear momentarily replaced by a spark of manic brilliance, chimed in. You could contract the field, sharpen it, use the gravitational differential between the interior and the exterior as a weapon. It would be like popping a bubble from the inside out. The resulting gravimetric shear would be catastrophic. Prometheus protested. It would tear their ship apart on a subatomic level. Good. Gregor rumbled from beside me, his big hands clenching into fists. The Salenti ship, emboldened by our lack of response, fired a second and third probe. The vibrations intensified, and a high-pitched whine began to build in the air, the sound of reality being stretched to its breaking point. A hairline crack, thin as a spider's thread, appeared in the ceiling of captive stars above us. This perfect world was dying. You have a choice, Prometheus, I yelled over the rising crescendo. You can hold to your precious philosophy and die with it, letting the last hope of humanity be stripped for parts by a pack of jackals. Or you can bend your rules to save the very thing you were built to protect. What is the point of a seed if you let the garden burn down around it? The AI's form flickered violently. I could feel the conflict within its core programming. The war between its two primary directives preserve the Genesis and do no harm. It was a paradox, and the Salenti were forcing it to a breaking point. The memories of my creators, Alani. They counsel peace. It whispered, its voice fragmented. They saw what war did to our people. They weren't here, I roared, desperation giving my voice a raw, ragged edge. They didn't see what came after the slow decay. The quiet desperation of the Odyssey, the generations born and buried in a metal tomb. Peace is a luxury we haven't earned yet. Right now, there is only survival. I stepped closer to the column of light, my face inches from its shimmering form. Listen to me, not to the dead, but to the living. We are your purpose. We are the Genesis, and we are telling you to fight. For a long, agonizing moment, the AI was silent, its form dissolving into a chaotic swirl of light. The ship groaned, a deep, painful sound. The crack in the ceiling widened. Then, the chaos subsided. The luminous form of Prometheus solidified, and when it spoke, its voice was different. The warmth was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper, and utterly focused. The parameters of the primary directive have been re-evaluated. The preservation of extant human life has been prioritized. The definition of harm has been recontextualized. The tactical display changed. The schematic of the stillness field, once a simple circle, now shimmered with complex energy vectors and gravitational projections. The ship's gentle, rhythmic hum was replaced by a deep, rising thrum of immense power being drawn from its core. Ava, the AI's new voice commanded, its tone crisp and absolute. Your experience with navigating unstable gravitational phenomena is required. Interface with the navigation console. A section of the pearlescent wall flowed and reformed itself into a pilot station, its controls a semi-liquid, holographic interface that seemed to mold itself to Eva's hands as she stepped up to it, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Ben, I need you at sensor analysis. Monitor their structural integrity and predict the shear points. Gregor, you will oversee the power conduits. I am going to divert the entire output of the ship's core into the field emitters, and I need you to make sure they don't melt. Consoles rose from the floor for them, stark and functional, alien to the bridge's organic design. They moved to their stations without a word, a lifetime of scavenging and improvisation making them adaptable. Ready. The AI turned its attention to me. Mara, you have the remnant. You understand the mindset of conflict. You will be the tactical lead. Tell me what to do. The shift in power was dizzying. A moment ago, I was a supplicant, begging for our lives. Now, I was the commander of a force I could barely comprehend. The weight of it was crushing, but the fire in me roared in response. I looked at the Silenti ship, a predator confident in its kill, its probes chewing away at our reality. They're arrogant, I said, my voice steady. They think we're a prize, not a threat. We're going to use that. Ben, what's the status of their shields? They've lowered their forward deflectors to channel more power to the destabilizing probes. Ben reported, his fingers flying across his new console. They're exposed. Perfect. I turned my gaze to the tactical display. Prometheus. Can you collapse the field in a directed cone, focused on their bow? The calculations are complex. The AI responded, but possible. The gravimetric backlash will be significant. Ava, can you handle it? I asked. Eva's face was pale but determined. I can try. Do it. I commanded. On my mark. The next few seconds were the longest of my life. The whine of the failing field grew to a deafening shriek. The ship bucked and heaved. On the display, I watched the energy levels of our field drop precipitously. A terrifying gamble. The Silenti commander, seeing our power fail, must have thought we were collapsing. He would be moving in for the kill. Now, Prometheus, I screamed. The shrieks stopped for a single, terrifying moment. There was absolute silence and stillness. Then, the universe outside the viewport twisted. The bubble of calm space we occupied didn't just pop, it lanced outward. A focused, invisible cone of gravitational shear, moving at the speed of thought, slammed into the front of the Silenti vessel. There was no explosion, no flash of light. The effect was far more horrifying. The front third of the massive scavenger ship simply ceased to be. The atoms that made up its hull, its crew, its weapons, were torn apart, their fundamental bonds unmade by the impossible gravity. The remaining two-thirds of the ship, its momentum unchecked, tumbled forward into the space where its front had been, tearing itself apart in a slow, silent, and utterly complete cataclysm of twisting metal and venting atmosphere. The backlash hit us a second later. The Vindication was thrown backwards, and every system that wasn't essential to the field emitters overloaded. The lights died completely, plunging us into absolute darkness, and the artificial gravity failed, sending us tumbling in the sudden weightlessness. We were adrift, blind, in the heart of the serpent's maw, the wreckage of our first and only kill floating silently outside. An emergency battery kicked in, casting the bridge in the dim, red glow of emergency lighting. Status report. I grunted, pulling myself toward a handhold on the floor, which was now a wall. Field emitters are offline. Gregor's voice came, strained with effort. The core is stable, but the primary conduits are fused. It will take time to repair. We're adrift, Eva added, but the immediate gravitational anomalies seem to have been cleared by the blast. We're in a pocket of relatively calm space for now, but we're not hidden anymore. Ben was the last to report, his voice shaky. Mara, the ship's distress beacon. It activated automatically when its hull was breached. It's broadcasting on a wide band, screaming for help. I pulled myself to the viewport. The wreckage of the Silenti ship was a ghost, a cloud of glittering debris. But beyond it, in the swirling chaos of the maw, a new light blinked into existence, and then another, and another. The distress beacon had been answered. We had won the battle, but in doing so, we had fired a flare in the darkest corner of the galaxy. We had announced our existence to anyone who was listening, and the vultures were gathering. Prometheus, I asked into the silence. The AI's luminous form was gone, but its voice came from the calm, weaker now, and tinged with something new. Not sorrow, but a chilling, cold resolve. I am here. Mara. The primary directive has been fulfilled. It has also been updated. The preservation of humanity now requires the neutralization of all immediate threats. The gardener had learned that to protect his garden, sometimes he needed to salt the earth around it. We had survived. We had won. But in doing so, we had awoken something in the heart of the vindication. We had taught the builder how to break. And as I watched the new signals converge on our position, I had a terrible feeling that we had just started a war we had no idea how to finish. The question was no longer whether we would run or fight. The question was what we would become in the process. The silence that followed our victory was heavier than any defeat. We floated in a newly carved void, a pocket of calm space created by the death of the Silenti ship, surrounded by a glittering tomb of its own making. The red emergency lights painted the pristine bridge in bloody hues, making a mockery of its serene, organic design. For a few precious minutes, there was nothing but the sound of our own ragged breathing and the faint, rhythmic ticking of cooling metal. We were alive. We had faced the abyss and spat in its eye. But the victory felt hollow, the silence pregnant with dread. Ben was the one who broke it, his voice tight with a tension that vibrated through the deck plates. They're coming. I'm tracking at least 5 signatures now. Similar energy profiles to the first ship. A whole pack of them. The Silenti operate in reclamation guilds. I said, the useless trivia from the remnant archives bubbling to the surface. They hunt in packs. One ship finds the prize, and the others move in to help strip the carcass. I looked at Gregor. How long until we can move? The big engineer was strapped to a diagnostic panel that had extruded from a nearby wall, his face a mask of concentration. The primary conduits are slag. I can try to reroute power through the secondary systems, but it's a delicate operation. If I overload them, We could blow the whole core. Give me an hour. Maybe. An hour. We had minutes. The approaching Silenti ships were faster, more aggressive than the first. They weren't coming to probe. They were coming to avenge and to claim. Prometheus? I said, my voice flat. Can we use the stillness drive again? The AI's voice responded from the comm. Its new, cold tone sending a shiver down my spine. Negative. The emitters are offline. Furthermore, a gravimetric weapon of that magnitude cannot be fired twice in the same sector. The local space-time is too unstable. It would be like trying to strike a match in a hurricane. The results would be unpredictable. So we're a sitting duck, Eva stated, her gaze fixed on the approaching lights in the viewport. A big, white, unmissable sitting duck with a broken engine. No, I said, a desperate, half-formed plan beginning to claw its way into my mind. We're not a duck. We're a trap. I turned to face them. The small, terrified crew of a stolen future. They think we're crippled. They think we're treasure. They don't know what this ship is. They don't know about the Genesis core. A flicker of understanding and horror dawned on Ben's face. Mara, you can't. The core is. It's everything. It's the last of Earth. It's no good to us if we're dead, I retorted, my voice harder than I intended. Prometheus, you said you couldn't weaponize the core, but can you open it? The AI was silent for a long moment. I could feel the logical processes warring within its disembodied consciousness. The cryostasis fields and seed banks are tied directly to the ship's primary life support and atmospheric processors. A directed external release is theoretically possible. It would vent a significant portion of the core's contents into the immediate vicinity. Not just vent, I pressed. I'm talking about a rapid, explosive decompression. All of it. The seeds, the genetic material, the atmospheric gases, everything. Can you do it? The ecological and biological material would be flash frozen and then sublimated by the vacuum of space. Prometheus calculated, its voice devoid of emotion. It would create a dense, complex organic cloud, a biological smokescreen of immense size and complexity. Exactly, I said. Their sensors are calibrated to track energy signatures, metal hulls, reactor outputs. What happens when you flood the area with a cloud of 1 million different species of pollen, DNA fragments, and aerosolized chlorophyll? Ben's eyes widened. It would blind them. Their targeting systems would be overwhelmed by a cascade of false biological readings. They wouldn't be able to get a lock on us. It's insane, but it might work. It was an act of profound desecration. We were about to take the last remnants of our homeworld, the cradle of our entire species, and use it as chaff. We were going to throw away our entire future just to buy ourselves a few more minutes of life. It was the most human thing we could possibly do. I cannot authorize the destruction of the Genesis core, Prometheus stated, its voice flat. It violates the primary directive. You're not destroying it, I argued, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. You're deploying it, tactically, to preserve the lives of the last living humans. Your directive has been updated. Remember, you have to choose. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Outside, the lights of the Silenti Guild grew brighter, closer. I could almost feel the predatory glee of their crews, closing in on the prize of a lifetime. The calculations are complete. Prometheus finally said. The release can be vectored. It will be wasteful. 94% of the core's contents will be rendered inert, but it will achieve the desired sensor interference. I require your command authorization, Mara. My hand was shaking as I placed it on the command console that rose from the floor. I thought of my father, the archivist, who had dedicated his life to preserving the memory of a blade of grass. I was about to vaporize an entire world's worth of them. Do it, I whispered. There was no explosion, no violent shudder. Instead, a profound and terrible sigh seemed to pass through the very soul of the Vindication. From multiple, invisible ports on the ship's hull, a cloud erupted. It was a storm of impossible color, a ghost of a world long dead, greens and golds and blues, the spectral essence of forests and oceans and plains, blossomed in the void, expanding with incredible speed. It was the most beautiful and tragic thing I had ever seen. A final, defiant flower blooming in the heart of a nebula. On the tactical display, the 5 distinct signatures of the Silenti ships dissolved into a chaotic mess. The screen became a blizzard of false readings. Thousands upon thousands of tiny biological contacts appearing and disappearing in an instant. We had given them a forest to hide in, and they were utterly lost. It's working, Ava breathed, a note of disbelief in her voice. They're confused. They're firing wildly into the cloud. Last beams of brilliant energy cut through the spectral forest, illuminating motes of what might have once been a redwood or a rose. The Silenti were firing at ghosts, wasting their energy on memories. Gregor, now I yelled, I need that engine. Working on it, he grunted back. Sweat beading on his forehead. The rerouting is almost complete. Just a few more seconds. A proximity alert blared. One of the Silenti ships, flying blind, was blundering toward us on its last known trajectory. It appeared out of the green haze like a monster from a dream, its ugly, functional hull suddenly filling our viewport. It was so close I could see the salvage claws on its prow, scarred and stained from 100 other kills. There was a sickening crunch of metal as its bow clipped our stern. The ship rocked violently, and a new set of alarms screamed to life. Hull breach in the aft engineering section, Gregor yelled. It's not major, but they're right on top of us. The Silenti ship, having found us by blind luck, began to bring its weapons to bear. We had seconds before they blew us out of the void. Now, Gregor, I've got it, he roared. The deep, resonant thrum of the Vindication's core reignited, a sudden and powerful heartbeat. The red emergency lights were replaced by the clean, white glow of full power. Engines are online, Eva shouted, her hands already a blur over the controls. Where to? I looked at the ship filling our viewport, at the others lost in the ghost of our dead world. There was nowhere to run. We were in the heart of a maze, and they were the Minotaurs. So we would have to become something else entirely. Prometheus, I said, my voice dangerously calm. The Silenti ship that hit us. Its shields are down from the collision. Confirmed. The AI replied. They're trying to board us. I am detecting cutting charges on the aft hull. Forget the engines. Ava, I commanded. Prometheus, divert all power, every last drop to the internal defense systems, not the weapons. The medical bay. Ben looked at me, his face pale with confusion. The medical bay, Mara. What are you doing? The medical bay on the Vindication was not like the grimy, functional sick bay on the Odyssey. It was a marvel of bioengineering, capable of regenerating tissue, cloning organs, and manipulating genetics on a microscopic level. It was designed to bring a species back from the brink of extinction. It was designed to create life. Prometheus, I said, a cold smile touching my lips for the first time. Can you isolate the nanite swarms used for cellular repair? Yes. The AI confirmed. They are currently inert. Activate them, I ordered, and release them into the Silenti ship through the hull breach. All of them. There was a pause. Their function is to repair biological tissue. Mara, they are not a weapon. They are now, I said. Flood their ship with them. Program them with one simple, repeat an instruction, find organic matter, and repair it indefinitely. Force their cells to replicate, to grow, without limit, without end. A new kind of horror dawned on the faces of my crew. This wasn't war. This was something far, far worse. The command is unorthodox, Prometheus stated, its voice a chilling monotone, but it does not violate my core programming. Executing. A faint hiss was the only sound. On the tactical display, I watched as a new kind of signal, a wave of microscopic machines, flooded the schematic of the enemy ship. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, the Silenti ship began to change. Distortions appeared on its hull, organic-looking growths that pulsed and swelled, bursting through the metal plates. A thin, desperate scream cut through the comms before being abruptly silenced. The ship shuddered, its lights flickering and dying. It was no longer a machine. It was a tumor, a cancer, growing wild and uncontrollable in the void, consuming itself from the inside out. We watched in horrified silence as the last Silenti ship was unmade, its crew and its technology becoming a monument to runaway life. The other 4 ships, seeing the fate of their companion, finally understood. They were not fighting a prize to be taken. They were fighting a nightmare. Their engines flared as they turned and fled, scattering into the chaos of the nebula, wanting only to escape the ghost forest and the monster that lurked within it. We were alone again, floating in a cloud of our own desecrated past, the silence broken only by the quiet hum of our fully powered ship. We had survived, but we had become butchers. We had used the cradle of life as a weapon of unimaginable horror. I looked at the faces of my crew, saw my own monstrous reflection in their wide, terrified eyes, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that we could never go back. We had saved humanity, but we had lost our souls in the process. The garden was gone, and we were the serpents. The silence that descended upon the bridge in the aftermath was not one of relief, but of profound, bone-deep shock. We were no longer adrift. The Vindication hummed with restored power, a living, breathing creature whose pristine white halls now felt like a mausoleum. Outside the viewport, the beautiful, tragic cloud of Earth's last lifeblood slowly dissipated into the nebula's currents. A ghost returning to the void. The cancerous as pulsating hulk of the Silenti ship was a stark and horrifying testament to what we had done. A monument to a line we had irrevocably crossed. No one spoke. Eva stared blankly at her console, her hands hovering inches above the controls as if she were afraid to touch them. Gregor had retreated into a corner, his massive frame slumped against a wall, his face buried in his hands. Ben was physically ill, his body trembling as he leaned against the sensor station, his gaze locked on the grotesque fate of the enemy crew. Even Prometheus was quiet, the ship's internal hum the only sign of its continued existence. It was I who finally broke the spell, my voice sounding alien and brittle in the heavy air. "Get us out of here. Ava, find the quietest, darkest corner of this nebula and take us there. I don't want to see another star for a week." Ava nodded numbly, her movements stiff and robotic as she laid in a course. The Vindication, graceful and silent, turned away from the scene of our violation and slipped deeper into the swirling chaos of the Serpent's Maw. The days that followed were a blur of hollow routine and unspoken recriminations. We kept to ourselves, ghosts haunting the perfect, empty corridors of our new home. The ship's automated systems provided us with food that tasted like ash and quarters that felt like prison cells. The silence was the worst part. It was a living entity, filled with the things we couldn't bring ourselves to say to each other. We had been a crew, a family forged in the desperation of the Odyssey. Now, we were four strangers bound by a shared atrocity. I spent most of my time in the now empty Genesis core. The Great Chamber, once a symbol of hope, was now a hollow wound in the heart of the ship. The empty cryo racks stretched into the distance like a field of metallic bones. Only a few sections remained, the 6% that Prometheus had been unable to vent. It was a pathetic remnant of a remnant, a ghost of a ghost. It was during one of these bleak vigils that Prometheus's luminous form coalesced before me. Its light seemed dimmer, its form less certain than before. "The crew is fracturing." "Mara," it said, its voice back to its original, calmer tone, though now it was laced with a deep, electronic melancholy. "The psychological trauma they have endured is severe. We're murderers." "Prometheus," I replied, my voice a dead monotone. "We used the cradle of life to create a biological horror show. There's no coming back from that. You made a choice to survive." The AI countered, "A choice that I facilitated. The responsibility is shared, but survival is not an end state. It is a prelude. The question is, what do we survive for?" I had no answer. The fire that had driven me, the burning need for retribution against the consortium, the desperate hope of reclaiming our past, it had all been extinguished, drowned in a cloud of vaporized DNA and weaponized nanites. We had become a monster to fight other monsters, and in the process, the thing we were fighting for had been rendered meaningless. "There is nothing left," I whispered, looking at the empty racks. "We threw it all away." "Not everything," Prometheus said. It gestured with a hand of light, and a single cryo vial rose from a protected rack in the remaining 6%, floating gently toward me. It was small, unassuming, frosted with condensation. Inside, suspended in cryogenic fluid, was a single, perfect seed. Sequoia sempervirens, Prometheus identified. A redwood, one of the oldest and most resilient living things from our world. It can live for thousands of years. It can survive fires, floods, and the passage of ages. Its roots run deep, and it reaches for the heavens. It is a symbol of endurance. I stared at the tiny seed, the last hope of a world, and felt nothing but the crushing weight of my own failure. We had saved ourselves, but we had lost our purpose. We were adrift, not just in space, but in history. A footnote with no story left to tell. It was Ben who found the way forward. He came to me a week later, his eyes hollowed out but clear for the first time since the battle. He held a data slate, not with the manic energy of a new discovery, but with the quiet solemnity of a final answer. "I've been studying the ship's logs," he began, his voice raspy. "The original logs. Captain Alani's final entries. I thought maybe I could understand why she chose to hide, why she feared war so much." He showed me the slate. It was Alani's last log, a simple, unadorned text file. It spoke of her grief at the fall of humanity, her despair at our self-destructive nature. But the final lines were not about the past. They were about the future. "We cannot save what we were," she had written. "That world is gone, and we must mourn it. But we can become the gardeners of what comes next. Not for ourselves, but for the galaxy. Our legacy will not be the worlds we conquered, but the worlds we seed. We will bring life to the barren places. We will be a quiet, patient, and unexpected spring." She wasn't running away. Ben whispered, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. She was on a mission, a different kind of mission. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. We had seen the Vindication as a weapon, a prize, an ark for our own salvation. But we had been wrong. It was never about us. It was a promise to the universe, a penance for the sins of our species. It was an act of creation in a galaxy that had only ever known us as destroyers. I took the slate and went to the bridge, where Eva and Gregor sat in their now customary silence. I had them read the log. I watched their faces as the captain's final, quiet words sank in. I saw the flicker of understanding, the dawning of a new, fragile kind of hope. For the first time in weeks, we talked, not about what we had done, but about what we could do. We were murderers. Yes, we were butchers. We had desecrated our own past, but we were also still here. We were survivors, and the last seed of our world was still in our hands. My final command as captain of the Remnant was a quiet one. "Prometheus," I said, standing on the bridge, the 3 members of my broken crew beside me. "Take us out of the maw. Set a course for the nearest system with a barren, terraformable world, the oldest, quietest one you can find." The AI's light pulsed with a warmth I hadn't felt since we first came aboard. "The directive is understood. Mara, the great work will begin." Our journey was not over. In many ways, it had just begun. We would never go home. We would never reclaim our history or seek our revenge. Our names would be forgotten, our deeds unrecorded. We would be ghosts, just as we had always been. But we would not be scavengers any longer. We would be pilgrims. We would carry the last ember of earth not as a torch of war, but as a seed of peace. We would find a new garden in a quiet corner of the galaxy, and we would plant it. And in the silence of that new world, under the light of an alien sun, we would begin the slow, patient work of earning our redemption. We would become the whisper of life in the overwhelming silence of the void. Our history was a river, and it had finally found a new and better course.